As you may already know, I've been on a mission to collect all the types of diabetes. No one's ever done it before, so I feel like there's got to be some sort of completion reward you get for collecting them all. I've already managed to get type 2 diabetes, so that just leaves 2 more to go. Let's see here. Type 1 diabetes usually only appears in adolescence, but can appear later in life. Okay, so not all hope is lost on that one. Let's hope we get lucky. What else do we have here? Gestational diabetes only appears in pregnant women. That one may be a bit more difficult.
In many games, there are certain collectibles that you can find or objectives that you can complete, aside from the main story, that aren't required to get to the credits. They exist to give the player something to do besides the main objective, but they also exist for some people, like me, who want to find every last piece of content available to them in nearly every game they play. I am of course talking about completionist content, a specific set of rewards or additional challenges that the player receives for doing everything the game has to offer. The amount of completionist content and what you need to access it varies a ton from game to game, with some requiring you to put in just a few hours and others requiring you to put in hundreds of hours. What I want to look at today though is the quality of this specific type of content from multiple games and whether or not the rewards are worthwhile to put all the hours in for. I am going to almost exclusively be talking about Nintendo games though, because frankly, there are comparatively very few non-Nintendo games that I have 100% completed, unsurprisingly.
Here, I don't want it. What the hell is this?
The amount of and type of completion content is also going to vary widely from game to game, with some giving you something as simple as some concept art for completion, and others giving you an entirely new set of challenges to overcome. But, as you may have guessed, none of the things I've mentioned so far will constitute whether completionist content is going to be good or not. It's way less of a black and white situation than that, so let's talk about it. Before I start though, I want to make sure I give my definition for completionist content, because it may be a bit different than you think. Completionist content, to me, doesn't necessarily mean content that is only accessible to a player who has done every single thing the game has to offer beforehand. It's not that simple. For example, some games may contain multiple types of collectibles, with different completion rewards for finding each. This is the case with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and I'm mentioning this game now and not later because I already made a nearly 30-minute video looking at this game as a whole. Anyways, in this game, there are 2 different types of collectibles, Kong letters and jigsaw pieces. The jigsaw pieces are hidden across each level, and when all of them are collected within one level, a piece of concept art is unlocked. The Kong letters, on the other hand, are not hidden at all and are usually just challenging to obtain due to the obstacles of the stage. However, when you collect all the Kong letters in a world, you unlock the corresponding K stage, which is a bonus stage in each world that has a much higher difficulty than the other levels. Furthermore, if you collect every Kong letter in the entire game, you unlock the hidden final world, Secret Seclusion, which houses some of the most difficult levels the game has to offer. My point in highlighting these collectibles in specific is that they essentially become 2 completely separate paths of completionist content for the player. One of them simply provides more content for the player to consume, while the other can give the player a glimpse into the development process of the game. So, when I refer to completionist content, just know that I'm not always talking about what the player gains access to when they reach 100% on their save file. The question is though, what makes completionist content good? Well, the answer to that is highly subjective, but I think to better understand what makes it good, we have to understand what makes it bad first. Let's start off with the worst completion reward of all time. Nothing. Some games quite literally do not acknowledge the fact that you have completed everything it has to offer, and just continue to act like you're playing the game normally. The most recent big example of this is in Breath of the Wild, when you reach 100% discovery on the Sheikah Slate. The criteria for this 100% involves completing all 4 divine beasts, collecting all 900 Korok seeds, discovering all 120 shrines, and finding all 226 labeled locations on the map. It's safe to say that this alone will take a long time, and that's not even all the game has to offer. But regardless, it does absolutely nothing when you achieve this specific feat. These games could at least display some type of message congratulating the player for all their hard work, but no, they act like we never even did anything acknowledgeable at all. Moving just a small step up the ladder of completion content, we have useless rewards. These are slightly better than getting absolutely nothing, since the game is actually acknowledging your hard work this time. A good example of this comes from Ocarina of Time. In case you didn't know, in this game there are 100 golden Skulltulas spread across the map for the player to find, and killing each one gives you a single Skulltula token. Returning to a specific building in Kakariko Village known as the House of Skulltula will allow you to exchange your collected tokens with the inhabitants of the house, a family who have been cursed and transformed into actual non-golden Skulltulas. Collecting the tokens will slowly begin to lift the curse off the family, so for your Skulltula tokens, they will offer up a series of rewards. But the reward I want to talk about specifically is the one you receive for collecting all 100 of the tokens, which you won't be able to do until you have essentially already finished the game, since they are hidden in nearly every single area. After doing this and breaking the curse on the family, you get rewarded with a huge rupee, worth 200 rupees. This, by far, is not the worst part though. Every time you leave the House of Skulltula and re-enter it, you can receive this huge rupee once again, meaning you essentially have infinite rupees once you get all the Skulltulas. But, as I mentioned, you are basically already at the end of the game once you can access every area that contains a golden Skulltula, so there is no longer anything left to spend your rupees on unless you just want to go replay all the minigames you already completed, which cost barely any rupees to play anyway. Another example of a useless reward shows up in the famous Super Mario 64. Now, before I go any further, let me just say that yes, seeing Yoshi on top of the castle is also part of the completion reward, and it is pretty cool, but I want to talk about what Yoshi gives you after you meet him as your supposed reward. When you collect 120 Power Stars in Super Mario 64, you can shoot yourself out of a cannon to the top of the castle, meeting Yoshi, who will then proceed to max out your lives when you speak to him. Here's the thing though, you've already done everything there is to possibly do in that game when you receive this reward. You don't need 99 lives, you don't need anything. I suppose you could go back and replay the levels you've already beaten, and sure, that's fun, but like, couldn't Yoshi have done something a little bit more interesting? It's just, hey Mario, nice to see ya, here's 100 lives, bye! Woo! Fun fact about Yoshi though, it seems that he was actually planned to be rideable, or at least have a bigger role in Super Mario 64 based on some textures being found related to Yoshi left over in the game's files. Fans speculate that his larger role in the game was scrapped due to the limitations of the Nintendo 64, but a model for him was already made, so they decided to put them on the roof as to not waste it. Later on, that model was polished up and used in the first Super Smash Bros. Game as well. After those types of completion rewards though, it gets quite a bit more subjective on whether or not the rewards are considered to be quote-unquote bad. Rewards such as adding an extra cutscene or a new image at the end of the credits, changing the title screen, or adding small Easter eggs into already existing cutscenes are definitely not the most substantial variations of rewards, but a lot of people still appreciate seeing them. For example, these types of rewards have been seen in nearly every single Mario Kart release, with a special after credits image, an alternate title screen, or sometimes even both. Considering how multiplayer oriented these games are, I feel like these completion rewards are fine, and are a nice bonus for anyone who is playing single player, since the rewards are generally associated with getting gold trophies or 3-star rankings on the Grand Prix Cups. A similar reward shows up in Super Mario Sunshine, where a new image will display at the end of the credits if the player manages to collect all 120 Shine Sprites in the game. Regardless, like I said before, the more substantial the completion rewards get, the more subjective the quality of them is going to get. You're never going to be able to please everybody, and that's why attempting to group them into categories of good or bad is just a horrible idea.
Wait a minute.
But there are obviously still quite a few things that happen upon completion in many games that are almost universally appreciated. I've purposely failed to mention any completion rewards that I genuinely like and that go beyond just a cool extra picture or cutscene up until this point. When completion rewards are done right, they can offer the player an extremely satisfying sense of closure in their playthrough, beautifully capping off the game with a perfect finish, the true ending, if you will. So, to answer the question from earlier asking what makes completionist content good, the word I would use is closure. Give the game the proper conclusion and send-off it deserves. Without this, I can't help but feel like something is missing, and sometimes that actually is the case. Time constraints, more commonly known as time crunch, are a big thing in the game development industry. Developers are never going to be able to include everything they wanted to include because of this, and in turn, completion content can take a hit just as hard as every other aspect of the game. With that said though, if I wanted to be a bit more specific as to what I personally like to see in completionist content, I love when I presumably have found everything the game has to offer, but I found out that there's even more to play afterwards, such as bonus levels, missions, or entirely new worlds to explore. Sometimes you can love a game so much that you never want it to end, and this can help, at least temporarily, to remedy that. However, you may be asking, why don't they just include this content for all players, regardless of their completion status? It would be better because everyone can enjoy the content without having to put in hours of extra work to get to it. And I definitely understand where you're coming from there, and I would agree with you in certain scenarios. The main goal of completionist content that offers up more gameplay, to me, is to present a final set of challenges to the player, testing them on all they have learned so far. Additionally, in some scenarios, the final section of the content will feature a celebration level, which isn't difficult at all and is meant to thank the player for doing all that the game has to offer to them. It all goes back to the idea of having closure. If the completionist gameplay isn't exactly like this, it would make sense to just simply leave it in the main game, and not locked behind the need to do everything else beforehand. So in that regard, I do agree with the people who think completionist content shouldn't be gatekept like that. Examples of this type of content show up in a lot of Mario games, with my favorite, and probably many others, showing up in Super Mario 3D World. After the credits, a brand new world shows up known as World Star that contains even more challenging levels for the player to complete. Even after that though, there are 2 more worlds full of remixed levels from earlier in the game that add some extra difficulty. But finally, there is World Crown, which is unlocked by collecting every green star and stamp in the game, as well as reaching the top of the flagpole in every single stage. Across all of these additional worlds, there are a grand total of 31 stages available as extra content to the player, considering it all comes after the credits roll. Back to World Crown though, this world is, in my opinion, the best conclusion they could have had for a game like this. The main attraction is the final level in the game, Champion's Road. This level truly is the final challenge, being much more difficult and longer than any of the previous levels, and it tests the player on all they have learned up to this point. At the end of this set of grueling challenges, with no checkpoints I might add, you go through a series of clear pipes that spell out thank you and light up as you pass through them. All with an ending, with all of the game's characters gathered together and cheering you on to the final flagpole. Even further, on top of this level, 2 more levels unlock in World Crown when meeting the criteria I mentioned earlier. The final and most challenging Mystery House challenge with 30 more power stars to collect, as well as the final Captain Toad level, which is by far the most difficult one, obviously. Now, the type of content presented in 3D World is a bit different because instead of giving you a reward for doing everything, they give you more gameplay with a final challenge to really test your skills. So I would call this a completion challenge as opposed to a completion reward, hence why I originally referred to all of this as completionist content. A similar ending happens in a ton of other Mario games such as 3D Land, Galaxy 1 and 2, and Odyssey, but 3D World is my personal favorite, with Odyssey at a close second. Odyssey gives you a final challenge after collecting 500 of the 880 unique moons in the game, with a level very similar to 3D World's final level. In fact, the thank you message concept is almost the exact same. The one thing making this worse than Champion's Road, however, is the fact that this level is considerably longer than that one, but there still aren't any checkpoints, which makes it extremely tedious when you die far into the level. A single checkpoint would probably have made this level my favorite of all time, since it is designed beautifully. Going back to Galaxy 2 though, I'm also a big fan of what happens after you collect the first 120 stars in the game. After doing this, 120 more green stars appear and scatter across every previous level. This, at least in my opinion, breathes new life into each of the levels you already played. I know some people aren't the biggest fans of the green stars, but I really enjoyed my time collecting them. Enough about that Mario idiot though, let's talk about someone else. In the Zelda games, completionist content takes on a much less prominent role, with most having little to no acknowledgement of your completion. I even touched on a couple of them earlier. However, I believe the real reward for completion in these games is how strong the player's character can become when they decide to find everything. Nearly every game has heart pieces that you can find to increase your health capacity. You can upgrade your weapons, you can upgrade the amount of money you can hold, the amount of ammo that your weapons can hold, your armor, the list goes on. Especially in the newer games, the list of upgrades and enhancements you can find gets to be quite long. But there were a few times where a Zelda game acknowledged your hard work as a completionist, but this was almost always with the optional side collectibles that typically don't reward you with anything super substantial anyway. I already mentioned the golden Skulltulas from Ocarina of Time earlier, but a similar thing happens in Twilight Princess with Pose, and Golden Bugs, in Skyward Sword with Gratitude Crystals, in Link's Awakening with the Secret Shells, and so on and so on. The rewards for collecting these never really gave anything super substantial, like I said, since most of them were similar to the rewards for the golden Skulltulas, basically giving you something that would have been great to have earlier in the game, but is virtually useless now. Can we talk about Breath of the Wild again for a second though? There's this collectible in the game called a Korok seed. They are hidden quite literally all around the map of the game, and there are a total of 900 of them to find. With that high of a number, you'd think the reward for finding them all would be pretty cool, right? Yeah, I thought so too, but the acknowledgement you receive from Hestu, the one who you turn your Korok seeds into, comes in the form of literal defecation.
Hey, congrats on finding all those seeds. Here, take this. Hey, thanks. Is this poop? Get shit on.
One Zelda game, however, does completion right, and that Zelda game is Majora's Mask. In this entry, the gameplay is largely focused around collecting masks that you can then wear to give you special abilities, activate transformations, or activate story or side quest progression. Usually, getting to the end of the game will have you fighting Majora, the final boss, as regular Link, which makes it a pretty tough fight. However, if you manage to collect all 23 of the game's masks before going to fight Majora, you will be rewarded with the final 24th mask by one of the children inside the moon. That mask is the Fierce Deity Mask, which is said to possess the powers of all other masks combined. This mask transforms Link and gives him a much higher damage output, longer range of attack, and allows him to shoot beams out of his sword at the cost of magic. This makes the final fight with Majora much easier than fighting him normally. The reason I like this so much is because the reward truly makes you feel like all the work you did in the game up to this point was worth it. You are much more powerful because of all the masks you collected, and it wouldn't have been this way if you didn't. This same concept was reused in Breath of the Wild as well, where your Calamity Ganon fight becomes much easier if you rescue all of the Divine Beasts. You know, that game truly is hit or miss with its completion rewards. I know I just complained for a long time about all these bad completion rewards, but I have failed to mention the positive side of doing completionist content, regardless of the quality of the reward or final challenge, and that is the journey you take to get there. Even if your final reward is complete crap, if you had fun with the process of getting there, that's all that really matters, since you got to enjoy more of a game you loved enough to do literally everything in. So even if you hear that the completion reward is worthless in a game that you really like, that shouldn't stop you from enjoying it all the way through anyway.
Well, sir, I don't know how the hell you managed to pull this off, but, you are pregnant. I did it! I finally did it!